I stepped off the trailhead and immediately felt it, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears and fills the spaces between your thoughts. The national park looked serene at first glance. Towering pines, golden sunlight scattering across mossy rocks, and the distant sound of a creek threading its way through the valley. My friends laughed behind me, backpacks bouncing as they adjusted to the uneven path, but I couldn't shake the sensation that we weren't alone. I tightened my jacket and took a careful step onto the worn trail. The air smelled sharp, piney, and strangely metallic, like copper. I glanced back at my group, Mark, always the eager one, Sophie, sketching every leaf she saw, and Liam, whose quiet presence usually grounded me. They didn't seem to notice it yet, but something about the way the shadows clung to the forest floor made my skin prickle. We wandered deeper, the trail narrowing and twisting more than the map suggested. The GPS signal flickered, weak and unreliable, though it had been perfect at the trailhead. I frowned, pushing my unease to the back of my mind. Probably just a dead zone, I muttered, more to myself than anyone else. As we rounded a bend, I noticed it, scratches on the bark of an old pine. Thin, deliberate lines forming a shape I couldn't name. I knelt, tracing the grooves with my gloved fingers. "Guys," I called softly, "look at this." Mark crouched beside me, eyebrows knitting. "Looks like an animal," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. I shook my head. "No animal makes marks like this, too precise like symbols." Sophie wandered closer, frowning. "It's beautiful in a way," she whispered, her pencil poised above her sketchpad. Even Liam, usually indifferent to the smaller details, leaned in, his brow furrowed. A sudden breeze rustled the trees, carrying a sound like something brushing across fallen leaves, or maybe someone moving just out of sight. I spun around, heart racing, but no one was there. "Did you hear that?" I asked, voice low. Mark chuckled nervously. "Probably just a deer," but my instincts told me otherwise. I could feel it in my chest, a persistent tug, that this part of the forest didn't want to be touched or watched. The path ahead dipped into shadow. Light filtered through the dense canopy in narrow shafts, illuminating patches of moss and leaf litter. Everything looked familiar yet subtly wrong, as if the forest itself had shifted overnight. My pulse quickened, the feeling of eyes on my back growing stronger, almost tangible. I forced a smile and stepped forward, convincing myself it was just nerves, the thrill of a weekend hike. But deep down, I knew the park had a story to tell, and we had just wandered into the first chapter. The trail narrowed even further as we pressed on, the trees leaning in like they were listening. Every step felt heavier, the forest around us growing darker despite the afternoon sun. I kept glancing over my shoulder, certain I'd seen movement out of the corner of my eye, shadows that shouldn't have been there, shifting in ways that no wind could explain. Mark was ahead, practically bouncing down the path. "Come on, you guys. This part is amazing." His voice echoed oddly, stretched over the rustle of leaves. I forced a laugh, but it died in my throat. Something about the sound didn't match the cheerful tone. It was distorted, hollow. Sophie lingered behind me, sketchpad in hand, her eyes scanning the canopy. "Doesn't this trail feel off?" she murmured. "Like it's leading us somewhere we're not supposed to be." I nodded, my stomach knotting. I had the same feeling that the forest wasn't just dense. It was deliberate, guiding us, pushing us along its hidden corridors. The sunlight flickered through the trees in strange, uneven patterns. I stopped mid-step, suddenly disoriented. The trail behind me didn't look right. The tree we'd passed 5 minutes ago should have been to my left, but now it was directly in front. I blinked, trying to shake the unease. "Guys, do you see that?" Liam slowed and frowned. "See what?" he asked. He squinted down the path. "Everything looks normal to me." But his voice lacked certainty. I swallowed hard. "It's the trail. It's not the same. That tree, we passed it already." Mark laughed nervously, though there was a tremor in it. "Maybe you just lost your sense of direction." "Maybe," I said, though I didn't believe it. My pulse was rising, each beat loud in my ears. I could feel the forest watching, each shadow and rustle amplifying the tension between us. Then I noticed something else, scratches on another tree, similar to the ones we saw earlier. Symbols etched deep into the bark, almost pulsing with some strange life. My fingers itched to trace them, but instinct held me back. A cold shiver ran down my spine. A sudden rustle from the underbrush made all of us freeze. Liam's head snapped toward the sound. Nothing moved, yet the forest felt alive, aware, almost sentient. I couldn't shake the sensation of eyes tracking our every movement. Sophie whispered, "It's like the park is watching us." I didn't answer. I only moved forward, each step heavier than the last, trying to ignore the prickling sensation crawling along my skin. But the forest refused to let us walk casually. Branches scraped in impossible ways. The wind carried whispers, or maybe echoes of our own thoughts. By the time we reached a fork in the trail, I could barely remember which way we had come. Every path looked plausible and wrong at the same time. And I knew with an unshakable certainty that whatever was here, the forest, the symbols, something unseen, was leading us somewhere. Somewhere we might not want to go. By late afternoon, the trail had completely lost its familiar shape. Trees leaned unnaturally, roots twisted like veins across the path, and the forest floor seemed to rise and fall in strange, uneven patterns. Every step felt like walking into someone else's memory, or a dream I didn't remember having. My pulse throbbed in my temples as I urged the group forward. Then we saw it, the ruins. Half hidden behind a thick curtain of moss and brambles, ancient stones jutted from the ground at odd angles. They weren't part of any campsite or ranger structure I'd ever seen. These were old, impossibly old, carved with symbols that seemed to shimmer in the fading sunlight. I crouched near one of the stones, tracing the grooves with trembling fingers. The lines were precise and deliberate, some forming shapes that almost resembled animals, others completely abstract, like something that shouldn't exist. I felt a strange pull, a tug deep inside me, urging me to understand them, to memorize them. Sophie knelt beside me, pencil flying across her sketchpad. "They're alive," she whispered, voice barely audible. "Not alive, but moving, like they're breathing." I shivered, staring at the symbols again. There was no wind, no movement, and yet the patterns seemed to shift subtly, as if acknowledging our presence. Mark circled the ruins nervously, kicking at loose stones. "It's creepy, really creepy. Maybe we should leave these alone." His words sounded hollow, swallowed almost immediately by the dense, suffocating air of the forest. I felt it then, an undeniable awareness, something ancient and patient, as if the forest itself had noticed our intrusion. My skin prickled, and the hair along my arms stood on end. Liam's eyes were wide, fixed on the shadows between the stones. "Do you feel that?" he asked. "Yes," I breathed. "Something's here, something watching." A sudden rustle came from deeper in the trees, low and deliberate, like a heavy footstep that didn't touch the ground. The sound made all of us freeze, our hearts hammering. The forest seemed to tighten around us, every branch and leaf conspiring to push us back, or perhaps pull us further in. I took a cautious step toward the largest stone. The symbols etched into it seemed darker, almost liquid in the dim light. A part of me wanted to touch it, to feel whatever force lingered there, but instinct warned me against it. This wasn't just a relic, it was a warning. Sophie leaned closer, whispering again, "It's like the park itself is alive here, and it knows we're intruding." I didn't answer. I only felt the undeniable truth of it, a presence older than any tree, colder than any shadow, patient and immovable. We had crossed into the heart of something that had always been hidden, something that didn't want to be disturbed. And I knew, with a clarity that made my stomach churn, that this forest wasn't just a place. It was a sentinel, a guardian, and we were trespassers. The forest around the ruins felt different, almost alive in a way I couldn't describe. Shadows stretched unnaturally, curling around the ancient stones like dark fingers. Every sound, leaves brushing, a twig snapping, felt amplified, deliberate, as if the forest itself were breathing with us. I tried to keep my composure, but each glance over my shoulder made my heart jump. Mark was restless, pacing near the edge of the ruins. "We should keep moving," he muttered, though his voice betrayed unease. "This place, it's messing with my head." Sophie, crouched over her sketches, didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed on the symbols, her pencil moving faster than I thought possible. Liam stayed quiet, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his pack straps. I wanted to speak, to say something reassuring, but the words caught in my throat. I could feel it, the presence that had lingered around the ruins, drawing closer, or maybe just making itself known. A shadow moved near the edge of my vision, too deliberate to be random, too fluid to belong to any human. "Did you see that?" I whispered, pointing. Mark froze, then shook his head. "It's nothing," he said too quickly, voice tight. "Probably just a trick of the light." But the forest didn't lie. I could feel its awareness pressing against me, cold and patient. I swallowed hard and took a step toward the trail, only to realize it didn't look like the one we had followed. The path we thought we'd memorized had shifted, the familiar bends replaced by new twists, almost like the forest itself had rearranged itself overnight. Sophie noticed too, frowning. "We've been walking in circles," she said softly. I know we didn't take this fork before." Panic began to coil in my stomach. The forest wasn't just disorienting us, it was actively guiding us, shaping our steps. And whatever was doing this, I realized, didn't intend to harm us for sport. It was testing us, watching us. Then I saw it clearly. A figure, or maybe a shadow, emerged between the trees. It moved slowly, deliberately, its form indistinct but undeniably present. It wasn't human. The way it glided, the weightless silence, made my throat dry. Mark saw it too, his lips parting in a startled gasp. Sophie froze mid-sketch, pencil hovering, and Liam instinctively stepped back. The figure lingered, just at the edge of the clearing, watching. I could feel its gaze as if it were piercing through me, understanding me in ways no one else could. My instincts screamed that this was the guardian of the park, the spirit I'd half dreaded and half hoped to see since we'd arrived. I wanted to run, to pull my friends and flee down some recognizable path, but my body refused. The air was heavy, charged with something ancient and unyielding. Even the rustle of leaves seemed purposeful, a warning we couldn't ignore. "You were trespassing," I whispered, more to myself than to anyone else. "It knows we're here." The figure didn't move closer. It didn't need to. Its presence alone was enough to bend the forest to its will, to twist paths and stretch shadows. Every instinct in me screamed that we were nothing more than intruders in its domain, and that the forest, patient and eternal, was just beginning to make us understand that fact. We tried to retrace our steps, but the forest refused to comply. Every turn led us deeper into unfamiliar territory. The trail bent in impossible ways, roots twisting across the path like skeletal fingers, and the trees seemed to shift slightly when we weren't looking. Our compasses wavered, our GPS signal flickered, and even Liam's careful maps were suddenly meaningless. Mark muttered under his breath, "This isn't real, none of this makes sense." He swung his pack over his shoulder, but his movements were stiff, hesitant. Sophie clutched her sketchpad as though it could anchor her to reality, and I could feel her trembling. I wanted to say something reassuring, but the words failed me. I could sense the forest pressing closer, closing in, testing our resolve, and I realized we weren't merely lost. We were being guided. It started subtly at first. Branches bent toward us without wind, shadows stretched along the ground in ways that didn't match the light. Then came the sounds, soft, deliberate footsteps that matched our pace but never appeared when we turned. Leaves rustled overhead, not from any breeze, but from something moving unseen. The forest had become a living maze, one that knew our every step. I saw the shadow again. It emerged from between the trees, gliding silently, larger this time, more defined, yet still indistinct. Its form was human enough to recognize, but wrong, elongated limbs, a head tilted at an impossible angle, movements fluid and unnatural. It didn't advance toward us aggressively, but its presence alone warped everything around it. I could feel the air grow colder with each second, my chest tightening as though the forest itself were constricting me. Sophie gasped, her pencil clattering to the ground. It's following us," she whispered. Her voice quivered, barely audible over the sound of my own ragged breathing. Liam's hand went to his forehead, as if trying to block the vision from his mind. "It's not human," he admitted, voice low, almost reverent. "Whatever it is, it's guarding." Mark finally snapped. "We can't stay here, come on." He charged forward down a path that seemed familiar, but immediately we ran into the same bend we'd passed before. The forest laughed around us in the way only an unyielding, conscious presence could. Every direction seemed both right and wrong, a cruel puzzle. Panic surged. I could feel it in the air, thick and oppressive. I tried to call out to keep the group together, but my voice faltered. The shadows moved closer, wrapping around our edges like smoke, yet the figure remained at a distance, watching, patient, omnipotent in its silence. The ruins flashed in my memory, the carved symbols, the silent warning etched into stone. We had trespassed, and now the forest itself was teaching us why. We split briefly, chasing different leads, trying to find any recognizable landmark, only to end up circling the same clearing over and over. Mark's frustration became shouting. Sophie's fear turned to tears. Liam's stoic calm cracked with whispered prayers. And I felt the presence of the guardian pressing on me, reading us, weighing us, testing who we were and why we were here. The forest seemed to stretch infinitely, swallowing paths and sunlight alike. I realized with a cold clarity that the spirit wasn't trying to kill us. It was enforcing its will, bending the world to remind us of our trespass. Every leaf, every branch, every shadow was a reminder of its control. We were trapped, not by walls or cages, but by the very essence of the park itself, alive and aware, a predator with no teeth, only patience. And I knew then, in the bone-deep silence between the rustles and footsteps, that escaping would require more than running. We needed to understand. We needed to survive the forest's test. But even that was no guarantee. The forest was suffocating, closing in around us, yet somehow I could sense a pattern emerging, a rhythm to the chaos. Every misplaced step, every turn that led us back to the ruins, it all felt deliberate, almost instructional. The guardian wasn't just observing. It was guiding us, shaping us, demanding something we didn't yet understand. We stumbled into a small clearing I hadn't noticed before. The air here was thick, almost tangible, carrying a faint scent of damp earth and something older, something ancient. The symbols we'd seen etched into the stones at the ruins flickered in my mind, as if reminding me that knowledge, not speed, was our lifeline. I crouched, tracing a line in the dirt with my fingers, trying to recreate the shapes, searching for some hidden meaning. Sophie joined me silently, her eyes wide. "Do you think it's testing us?" she whispered. Her pencil lay abandoned on the ground, forgotten. I nodded slowly. "Yes, but I don't think it wants us to fail. It's not cruel. It's enforcing rules we can't fully see yet." Mark paced, muttering under his breath. "Rules. Rules don't matter when you're lost in a forest like this." His voice cracked, fear bubbling beneath the surface. Liam stood a few steps back, his calm returning in a strange, deliberate way. "Mark's right about fear," he said quietly. "Panic will get us nowhere. We need to observe, not fight." And then I saw it again. The figure emerged from the shadows, gliding between the trees with impossible grace. This time it stopped closer, revealing more of its form, tall, draped in what looked like living bark and moss, limbs elongated but natural, as if the forest had sculpted it from itself. Its head tilted, studying us, aware of every heartbeat. I realized then that the guardian wasn't malicious. It was enforcing the forest's will, teaching us boundaries, showing us that intrusion had consequences. I swallowed hard. "We need to follow it," I said. "We need to understand it. We can't run anymore." Sophie hesitated, fear flickering across her face, but she nodded. Mark's shoulders tensed, but he didn't argue. Liam gave a slight nod of agreement. We followed, stepping carefully along the distorted paths the Guardian allowed. Branches bent out of the way, shadows shifted, and every movement felt like a negotiation. The forest itself seemed to breathe with us, expanding and contracting in sync with our steps. Each pause brought a new lesson, shapes in the roots, subtle changes in light, and the faint whispers of wind that hinted at safe passages. Hours or maybe minutes passed. Time was meaningless here. Every false turn reminded me that the forest wasn't lost. We were. The Guardian watched, patient and eternal, allowing only glimpses of escape for those willing to understand its language. Finally, we reached another clearing. A cluster of ancient stones stood there, carved with symbols even older than those at the first ruins. The Guardian hovered at the edge, silent, its presence undeniable. I realized the truth. Survival didn't depend on force or speed. It depended on awareness, respect, and the ability to read the forest as it wanted to be read. I looked at my friends. Sophie's eyes were wide with comprehension. Mark's jaw was tight, but he breathed steadily. Liam's calm had returned fully. I knew then that not all of us might make it, that the forest measured more than courage. It measured clarity, patience, and humility. And we had only begun to prove ourselves. The clearing was quiet, almost unbearably so. The Guardian lingered at the edge, its form partially hidden by shadows and trees, but I could feel its gaze pressing into me, judging, weighing, deciding. The symbols on the stones glimmered faintly in the dim light, and I understood at last. This was the final test, the last measure of whether we could leave or remain. I took a careful step forward, heart hammering. We need to do this right," I whispered to my friends. Sophie nodded, tracing the shapes in the dirt as I had done, murmuring each line aloud. Mark stood stiff, trying to mask his fear, while Liam silently observed the Guardian, as if communicating with it through some invisible language. The air seemed to hum with awareness, alive and tense. I realized the forest itself held its breath. Every rustle of leaves, every faint whisper of wind, was part of the ritual, part of the code we had to follow. I traced the final symbol and froze. The Guardian tilted its head slightly, as though acknowledging our effort. Relief surged, but it was fleeting. The forest never released its hold completely. A sudden movement to my left made me jump. Mark had wandered too close to a shadowed patch, and the forest recoiled as if to warn him. The Guardian glided closer, its elongated limbs barely disturbing the underbrush. I reached out instinctively, grabbing Mark's arm. "Stay focused," I hissed. "This isn't over until we're all safe." Sophie finished the last symbol, her voice trembling. The forest exhaled, or maybe I imagined it, but the tension around us eased slightly. The Guardian stepped back, lingering one last time, then melted into the shadows of the trees. The path ahead looked different now, clear, yet still strange, as if it had always been there but unseen. We began to move cautiously, following the trail that felt permitted. Every step was deliberate, careful, yet the forest still watched, still measured our resolve. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had lost its meaning. Some paths led nowhere, dead ends that tested our patience and understanding. I felt the weight of the Guardian's presence with every step, silent, impartial, eternal. By the time the edge of the forest came into view, relief and exhaustion collided. I looked back, half expecting to see the Guardian waiting, but there was only the dense trees, still and silent. I could feel its judgment lingering, even from a distance, a reminder that we had only been allowed to leave because we had learned, however imperfectly, how to respect this place. We stepped out onto the familiar trailhead, sunlight striking differently now, warmer somehow, yet I knew it was an illusion. The park remained alive behind us, patient and eternal, guarding its secrets. Mark slumped against a tree, trembling, muttering apologies and gratitude. Sophie quietly sketched one last symbol in her pad, lips pressed together in awe. Liam simply stared, silent, a distant look in his eyes. I exhaled slowly, trying to shake the feeling of being watched. But even as the trailhead receded behind us, I couldn't escape the certainty that the forest remembered every step we had taken. Every misstep, every pause, every whispered word. And somewhere in the shifting shadows of the park, the guardian remained patient, eternal, and utterly vigilant. I glanced at my friends, heart still pounding, and realized we had survived, but only just. And the forest, the spirit of it, would wait for the next intruders.